Back live with you tonight on In Focus. Thanks for staying on. Police and Prison Civil Rights Union has welcomed the Correctional Services Department's decision to cancel the G4S contract to run the Mangaung prison. It comes after convicted murderer and rapist Thabo Bester allegedly faked his death in a fire to escape the Bloemfontein prison last year. Investigative journalist and misery merchant author Ruth Hopkins joins us now for some reaction on this. Ruth, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time tonight. Correctional Services Department saying it's more than just the Thabo Bester factor that they are taking into consideration. They're saying there are other matters that the department was not comfortable with, and they sought some legal advice, and the suggestion was that certainly they must terminate this particular contract. I'm sure you would agree that you yourself were investigating other matters that would have warranted that contract to have been terminated quite a long time ago.
Yeah, I'd say the contract should have been terminated at least 10 years ago. There were many other issues that warranted the termination of the contract, but I believe the Bester escape was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Do you think there's enough in that Bester escape that would certainly be good support for the department should G4S want to challenge this in court?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, it's a blatant, terrible, grave breach of security of the prison. It implicates loads of G4S guards up to management level. So yeah, I mean, it clearly indicates that the prison was not secure and was not operating as a proper prison, and also the fact that Bester managed to run this media company from jail before he escaped. I mean, that also points to, you know, deep-seated corruption and collusion, and very problematic.
Yeah. Is it a system that is a problem, or is this a particular company, or is it the private companies that are getting involved in our correctional services system that is bringing about this kind of challenges? I mean, if you read some of the reports that came out recently, I mean, thousands and thousands of contraband making its way into these prisons a year, just this year alone. Just this week, we're hearing of a number of escapes that involve the correctional services officials themselves who are now suspended. Is it a system thing, or is there more to what G4S itself as a company that it does that needs some attention?
Well, I think systemic privatized prison. So it's a systemic problem in that in South Africa, the entire prison sector is problematic. There's widespread corruption and violence and abuse going on in other prisons, state-run prisons in South Africa. I mean, when I lived there, I investigated issues in Sun City, for example, in Johannesburg, in Pollsmoor Prison, in Leeuwkop, all over the country. And loads of state-run prisons have very similar problems, but I think it's exacerbated in Mangaung, and that's a systemic problem of privatized prisons, and that is that everything has a price tag. So from the row to the price per inmate per day, and I think it's a systemic problem that an inmate becomes a commercial entity, and that's not the case in a state-run prison. In a privatized prison, it is. An inmate becomes a commercial entity that can be earned, you know, profit can be made off the inmate, and there's an incentive to keep crime rates high, and that's also why you see this kind of crime manifest in a privately run prison. It was all around money. People were getting involved in this because of money, and the entire prison operation is guided, is grounded in profits, in money.
Now, I believe you're saying this particular contract with G4S runs into what, over 2,000 pages or so that you would want to go through. But essentially, what has happened here, it's partners, right? It's like 4 or 5 of them that have come together as far as the Mangaung Correctional Services is concerned. does the termination of the contract means it's a termination with all of them?
Yeah, so the shareholders to the prison contract, Bloemfontein Correctional Contracts, BCC, they actually signed the prison contract with the South African government. And yeah, so they're owners of the prison and of the contract. They earn a profit off the contract. And so, yeah, the contract will be terminated with them. G4S is one of 5 shareholders. The others are called Ten Alliance Mangaung, Fikile Mangaung, and Equasi Community Trust, and Old Mutual. And
once again, the question of rents and cents coming into play here. They've developed this particular facility. The Department of Correctional Services is saying, well, now we are going to have the benefit of this legacy that was created by this particular partnership. Is it going to cost them more? Are we going to find ourselves in a situation where the department has got to pay these people more as far as rental is concerned for this facility?
Well, I'd have to go back to the contract and study it, study the stipulations in the contract. But I believe if the contract is terminated prematurely, the government is looking at incurring crippling debts. They need to pay the capital costs of the prison, and it's costing, I think it was 45 million rand a month. So it's an extremely expensive enterprise. And Bloemfontein Correctional Contracts, BCC, they went to court last time the prison was taken over, 10 years ago, partly as a result of my investigation. And DCS basically ran the prison for 10 months, and BCC still claimed money for those. They were still earning money those 10 months. And so DCS took them to court, but the judge ruled in the favor of the shareholders, because DCS was saying, but we ran the prison for 10 months, so we shouldn't be paying BCC. But the judge ruled in the favor of the shareholders. So I don't know what the outcome will be now. And also it would surprise me if G4S and the shareholders went to court, because they have now really made such a mess. But who knows? Maybe they will, and who knows? Maybe the judge will rule in their favor again. But yeah, we're looking at really large amounts of money and crippling debt for the department. Yeah,
and let's go back to that. You're saying they did earlier on. Was it in 2015? Was it 2018? When did DCS take over the management of the facility?
2013.
2013, right? How easy was that takeover? I mean, was it a smooth transition?
Well, it was actually on exactly the same basis as Section 112 of the Correctional Services Act. And that's geared towards a temporary takeover. So that's geared towards restoring order. And so for a long time, this time, it looked as if that was going to happen again. Just a temporary measure, restore order, the prison would be given back to G4S. So I was actually, I guess, pleasantly surprised that the contract was actually fully terminated, because it looked as if everything was just going to be repeated again. And at the time, in 2013, a widespread strike had broken out at the prison, and approximately 330 G4S workers were not coming to work anymore. And so DCS showed up with a task team. They actually really did take over the running of the prison, and did a marginally better job, but not fantastically. And I think that is also the problem. As I pointed out before, South African state-run prisons are incredibly troubled. And so I think it's good that the contract has been terminated. But I do think, and what now, because DCS is also deeply complicit in the corruption and the crimes committed, the cover-up. They've protected this company for years and years and years. So the fact that they are taking over, I have a few questions about that.
And they are taking over in 90 days, especially in a space of 3 months. What exactly does that mean? What do they need to do in getting ready to take over, at least in the next 3 months?
Well, I actually don't know in detail what their plan is, but I imagine that the takeover will be mainly in terms of employees and that it will become a state-run prison. I also imagine that they can't just stop all the tenders around the prison, so that they will continue to have to spend a lot on because it is a very modern, quite extensive prison. You know, there's lots of educational courses going on, training, 2 vocational centers. It's one of the biggest maximum security prisons in the world. So yeah, I mean, they'll have considerable costs, and I imagine that they won't just stop all the tenders and stop the whole operation of the prison. They'll kind of have to continue that. And I imagine that the takeover will first and foremost be staff, and I imagine they'll also take down the G4S logo and replace it by a DCS sign. So I imagine that's what's going to happen. But I can't see that they could, in such a short period of time, change all the tenders around, the commercial contracts around this prison. So I imagine that will take a lot longer. Yeah.
G4S going to Parliament said, well, this is, they wanted us to believe this is an isolated event, this Thabo Bester event, and they've done all they possibly could to bring those who are responsible to account. Some others were fired. Well, we know now they've been arrested and they're going to have to answer in court. But you have spoken to a number of prisoners who have been in that particular prison, and you've gained some insight and revelations. If one was to put the Thabo Bester matter aside, why do you personally have trouble with that prison? What was revealed to you by those prisoners?
Well, when I was doing my investigation, there was widespread abuse and violence taking place. So inmates were being beaten up, sometimes for no reason. They were getting electroshocked, forcibly injected with antipsychotic drugs. And in my book, Misery Merchants, I also document the death of an inmate, Isaac Nalani, who was tortured to death. And this, again, I think is problematic in terms of what's going to happen now, because if you look at that case of Isaac Nalani, G4S guards tortured this man to death. DCS knew was involved. The SAPS knew was involved. And nobody did anything. Nobody held basically the murderers accountable. There was no criminal prosecution. As far as I know, not even any fines. So I think that's really problematic in the current time frame. That I think who's holding who accountable, because G4S can say this was an isolated incident, but if you look at my book, all the other incidents that I document, it's definitely not an isolated incident. This is a hugely troubled hellhole of a prison where terrible things have happened, and therefore I'm glad that the contract has been terminated. It's a first step.
Yeah, is South Africa the first country to do so? I mean, G4S is an international company. Are they allowed to continue these kind of practices elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, are they allowed? Yeah. Sadly, they are. That's capitalism for you. But here in the UK, where I'm based, in 2018, G4S ran a prison in Birmingham. Also spun completely out of control, violence, drugs, it was complete chaos. And the government stepped in, took over the prison, terminated the contract. So you'd think, oh, well, there's accountability. Well done. And then a few years later, the UK government decided to open a new private prison, 1,300 beds, $300 million pounds contract. Who gets the contract? G4S. So seemingly there's accountability, but then there's not. And I just think it's also hugely problematic that multinationals are earning a profit off the incarceration of people. You know, like I said, leads to prisoners becoming a commercial entity. So there you have a financial incentive to keep the crime rate high. No country should want that. That's not a good idea.
Ruth, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on tonight. Investigative journalist and author of Misery Merchants, Ruth Hopkins, there reacting to, of course, the latest development as far as the termination of the contract to run the Mangaung Correctional Center. G4S contract is what we're talking about.